I started summering here in about 1956 and realized that I wanted to summer here, but I also wanted to do physics. So this was tossing around in my mind about how to combine fishing and physics. And at some point, it struck me that the Institute would be the key to combining these sort of passions that I had. And I think it was the Caudilles who arranged a meeting between myself and Craig, who was the Institute, really. And I tossed out the idea about why shouldn't we have an institute here in Aspen that I could come to. Craig would build it, of course, and I would come to it and then go fishing all the time. And of course, he swallowed hook, line, and sinker, I think. I think the fishing part got you.
Were you already on a faculty?
I was still finishing my doctorate at Carnegie Mellon at the time.
When did you finish up there?
61.
61, yeah.
Well, we got together at Sam Caudille's over dinner, and then my recollection is several meetings, but at that time I was also thinking that with the death of Pepke, the Institute was going through a transitional period in which Bob Anderson very generously had jumped in to take on. In fact, even before Pepke had died, Bob Anderson became essentially the chairman of the Institute, and Walter realized that he had a guy who could pick up the tab or could write off the deficits in a way that he had tried to do but was finding hard. I thought that the Institute needed something in the way of original thinking going on, not just what we had within the programs of the main programs of the Institute, which was basically the executives program, and plus some public lectures that spun off from that. And I thought that it would be that this particular place and the way things were evolving in the country as a whole, that it would be a very good thing for Aspen to have a kind of center for advanced studies, though not as extensive as in its disciplines as Princeton or any other of the institutes, of which there are a few others in Europe. And but as we talked more, George and I, and as I listened to George, and then we brought in on a consultancy basis Hillary Putnam, from Harvard. Hillary's a philosopher of science, mathematician and logician. He's still writing and is a very able guy. And we also had Walter Orr Roberts, who was then head of the high altitude observatory that Harvard had at Climax, and he later became the founder of the National Center for Atmospheric Research. As we listened to these people,
could you tell the date?
This was 60. This would have been early '62.
No, it had to be.
Or it might have been. It might have been in late '61.
Yeah, because by '61.
Well, maybe it was the summer of '61.
Or it had to be even earlier than that.
I think earlier than that too, but never mind.
Well,
okay, go ahead.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been before we met with Michel Berger. Yeah. In any event, let's say it was early summer of '61. That could have happened because I know we brought Hillary Putnam out in the summertime, and Walt Roberts came up from
he came over.
It became clear that it would be a mistake to have a multidisciplinary activity, and also, although the idea was tempting to have some social scientists take part, I had a very strong personal bias against most of what passed for social science, feeling it was much more social than scientific. And so it was kind of a self-resolving problem that if we were going to do this thing, it had to be around. We had this young guy named George Stranahan who cared a great deal about something like this happening, and had the drive and initiative to do it, and we ought to just focus on physics. I really wanted the impacts of this thing, though, to be felt within the Aspen Institute. As it turned out, and maybe we should talk about that later, the Institute, particularly under Shorty Pabst and a couple of other trustees, urged on by Mortimer Adler, felt very strongly that the Physics Center was very threatening because the people were much smarter, obviously. And that was part of our problem.
Bob,
So then we went on from
Bob,
there.
what were you doing at the Institute in those
I was
days?
the executive director
And when
and
did you
chief
start
executive
doing it?
officer, essentially.
When did you start being the executive?
I started in 1954 when I came back from K2 and after I'd left Columbia University and come out here. So I was the first resident executive director of the Aspen Institute.
Well, we were very lucky. I mean, Bob, you had some training as a philosopher, didn't you?
My field was philosophy, and I took a degree in biology, and I had quite a bit of mathematics.
So this guy was really quite a versatile fellow, more than one would normally find sitting in a position like that, which was lucky for us.
Yeah. And also just post-Sputnik, too, so there was kind of
Right, yeah.
a fever for physics.
Yep.
Well, I'm not sure how much fever there was here, but
Not
at least
In the
there was
country,
some
in the
fever
country.
there.
He's talking about.
Well, I came at this from a completely different end. I'm Mike Cohen. At that point, I was an associate professor of physics at Penn, and had only been that for a little while. And fortunately, I knew almost everyone in the field. There was never a formal division of labor among us, but clearly my role, at least in the very early years and the first year, was to sort of round up the physicists. Now, I had never heard of Stranahan or Craig. I was a friend of a faculty member at Carnegie Tech, where George was a finishing graduate student at that time. The faculty member was Michel Béranger, whom I had met, and also his wife, Elizabeth, who was Harold Urey's daughter. I had met them when they were postdocs at Caltech, where I did my graduate work. And I had stayed in touch with them. And there were a number of us, the Bérangers, myself, I could name some other people who liked the outdoors. And we liked the idea of somehow doing physics in the summer and also being out west somewhere. And at that time, summer salaries from grants had really only just been invented. And it was pretty much assumed, it was a fact of life, that if you didn't stay home at your own institution, then you couldn't get paid by your summer grant. So I had got into the habit of going to Los Alamos. Michel Béranger, I think, was going to General Atomic. I'm not sure where other people went. Those were two principal places. And I had talked to a number of people, Michel in particular, but a number of other people. I had probably talked to Randy Durand already about this, whom I had known at the Institute for Advanced Study. Wouldn't it be nice if a bunch of us could get together, take our summer salaries with us to some place, and I immediately thought of the Rockies, and get together, do our own work there, and talk to each other instead of working on someone else's problems. I must admit, what I had in mind was something that never would have flown. I had something in mind like a tent city where we'd eat in some big tent. I even talked to John Toll, who was chairman of the physics department at Maryland at that time, and the town of Tollland, just west of Boulder, apparently had been part of his family estate. I even went up there and took a look at it. Anyway, at one point in 1961, I got a handwritten note from Beranger, and that I can't find. I'm going to look for it, saying there's a graduate student here, George Stranahan, who lives in Aspen, who has been talking to the director of the Aspen Institute, and they'd like to bring some physics to Aspen. And then I think I actually wrote a letter to George, which I can't find a copy of, and George no doubt threw out. He also
or burned.
George also threw out several neckties, which I once left behind in his house. He throws out everything. However, the first document I have in my files is a letter from George to me, dear Professor Cohen, in April '61, saying, you know, that he was glad to get my letter, and then he tells, you know, what he had been talking about with Craig, and, you know, we've got to get together. So there was a coming together from two ends. Definitely they had discussed that stuff before George wrote me. The letter itself, I doubt whether you want it to be read now, but the letter indicates very clearly that they had talked quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I remember now that it's vague, but it had to be in the summer of 1960 that we met at Caudill's, and that and early in the summer, and that we then went on from there. And I got the agreement of Bob Anderson to at least undertake this effort and to even eventually commit on land for a building for this. But it was all a very nebulous concept at that point.
Now, in a certain sense, a pivotal event was the actual physical meeting of certain parties, namely George, Michel Beranger, who was very much involved in the planning. I don't know, maybe his name ought to be up on the plaque. Anyway, George, Michel, Bob, Craig, and I actually met at the Pittsburgh airport in late April '61. Craig was always on the move, and you were lucky to catch him for a couple of hours on his way to see the Kennedys. And at that point, we physically met each other. I think we ought to say that there was very good chemistry among us.
Oh, yeah. We were, I think gamblers and larcenous people always recognize one another.
Yeah, it's true. And at that time, I remember we kind of cut the pie up about Cohen. You know all the physicists.
Yeah.
Craig knows everybody in Washington. He's going to go get the grants. Cohen's going to round up physicists, and I'm going to have a building ready for all these things to come together. And
for example, you'll find in the early files, shortly after that airport meeting, a letter from Bob to George saying that he was very pleased with the meeting, and then they summarize where the project is at that point.
I spent the fall, I think, of '61, fall and winter of '61 out here. I was just finishing my PhD, and I was going to live out here and kind of ramrod through this project. So I was here, and at that time we were going to design the building, do the fundraising, and start construction, have it open for summer of '62, and that occupied a lot of my time. Craig entertained me quite a bit at the Institute with the idea that I would charm the money out of his clients, which actually we did charm a little money out of a couple of his clients.
Yes, we did.
And IBM was one of them. I can't remember a couple of the others, but.
Oh, my recollection was that Shirley Silverman got us some money up front.
That was quite
Before
a bit
Gruner.
later, I think. We'll get to that.
I see that in your notes, but I thought, in any event, we got, and the Institute, I drew some discretionary funds, paid for Hillary Putnam's flight out and trip to Aspen, whatever it took. And then George, in the meantime, persuaded the trustees of Needmore to agree to finance a building if we provided the land for the building.
May I ask George an embarrassing question? The need more money, was that money that they appropriated, or did you in fact hand them that money for the purpose of giving it back to us, as I suspected?
Your suspicion is correct. What made the commitment to the Institute was that we would fundraise as best we could, but that the Need More Fund would cover any deficit, so they could go ahead and build a building and know that they would not be out of pocket. And in fact, that was secretly me, of course.
Well, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
We got the building done. I think there's a little window during which people hadn't realized that this thing was happening or going to happen. Anderson did all along.
Yeah.
I say to his credit, he understood
Exactly.
what was going on.
Yeah.
But others didn't, and one of the others who was very critical of the Physics Center was Harold Pabst, Shorty Pabst, who about that time, or not too long afterwards, became mayor of Aspen. I tried to get him to be mayor to take him off
Get him
my
out of the
back.
way, yeah.
Yeah, but unfortunately, he found time to take shots at the idea of the Physics Center and at me. And finally, in 1964 or thereabouts, I decided that I better take up cattle ranching on Woody Creek.
Bob, curiously enough, I remember right at the beginning, I remember Pabst himself running a tractor or a bulldozer out there digging the ditches for us. So at some level, he must have been friendly.
That was before he. That was before he thought about it.
I
think it was before he met us, actually.
Who planned the building?
It's a Herbert Bayer building.
And Herbert designed the Stranahan Hall.
So,
The original design, of course, was going to be all rock, hand-built. It was going to be a magnificent monastery. His idea was that it was actually to imitate a monastery, so that the windows would actually look out on walled-in courtyards so that we could not see the mountains. He felt that for us to see the mountains would distract us.
Weren't we each going to have our own little pen?
Yeah, each was going to be a little pen.
Like lions in the circus, in the zoo, that we could run in separately.
And then the bid came in, of course, and all this hand rock stuff was outrageous. So in the typical Herbert Bayer fashion, we then went back to cement block, which is every building he's ever designed has ended up a cement block for the same reason.
Yeah. And as it
And
turned
we got
out,
the walls taken away. It's not a monastery.
the square foot cost
It's
of
$10.
Stranahan Hall was about I'd say between 11 and 14 square foot.
The seminar room was hopelessly inadequate.
Yeah.
I think, is it correct that he thought we ought to be sitting around a table in the Aspen Institute model? And I thought maybe George tried to explain to him that physicists generally don't sit around tables, but sit, in row. I mean, when they're listening to a talk, they sit in rows of people, and someone stands at the blackboard. And I had the impression that he didn't like that and gave us a seminar room which was so minimal as to reflect his dislike of that model.
Yeah, no, Herbert left his mark on us. Actually, because I was fundraising for the building, the building is a bit my responsibility, so I picked Sam Caudill to be the architect because I knew him. And there came a wonderful moment of crunch when it was Bob Anderson, I believe, informed me that Herbert Bayer would be the architect.
Yeah.
Didn't...
And I remember, Sam and I walked out, I said, this is it. I don't get bossed around like that. But it's a Herbert Bayer building. Yeah.
Well, didn't we deal largely with an assistant of Herbert's, Harry Ellensweig,
Harry executed.
who was really a
Herbert's
splendid guy.
Yeah,
Very
oh, he
good guy.
was splendid.
Yeah,
Good guy.
he was a very good friend.
Yeah.
And he got it done.
Yeah.
What was the arrangement with the Institute for the use of the land?
We just committed to it. We
Yeah.
just picked the spot and cited it, and of course, that came into some dispute later on in terms of where the corners were and so on when it came time to, replace Hilbert Hall with this building. Right?
But the Institute owned the land and the building, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we didn't
Right.
own anything.
At that time, I remember Craig called me. We walked over here, and he said, what do you think about this spot over here? It's far away from everything. Maybe you won't be seen. And I said, that's fine with me. That's cool. And we built the building on the Institute's property. It was never subdivided or carved out. We ultimately ended up with a bit of problem because we claimed the building as ours since we had built it, and the Institute, because it was on their ground, claimed it. So both of us were depreciating the building on our
990s.
balance sheet.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more to add, Bob, about the Institute's involvement in establishing the center?
Well, I think it was seen for a time at least as a good thing, but as I say, as around 1964, 65, there began to be, reactions to the fact that during this same period, I should mention that we started with the help of Alan Waterman, then head of the National Science Foundation, a dialogue series called The Public Understanding of the Role of Science in Society. And we managed to involve quite a number of physicists in that. And we also had people like Harlow Shapley and Saul Alinsky, a variety of people, not all scientists, and a few people from Congress. David Packard took part, one of the last ones. And the idea was, my feeling, because of my bias, was that science ought to be equally important in the Institute's evolution, because that's where the most creative thinking that's taking place in at least this epoch was happening. And that finally got pushed aside, and Mortimer Adler came back and reasserted himself, because I'd managed to push Mortimer off into a corner for several years while Walter Pepke was still alive. But all of that changed. So I think that there have been others subsequently who look at the Physics Center and say, why are we not still together? And but I don't think too many people have, made an issue of that.
We were.
And Anderson did allow for the transition and finally the transfer of title to the land to the physics.
The title never happened till.
That was about.
No, that was just a couple of years ago
about 3
when we
years
finally.
ago, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think early on we bought into Cohen's idea of that the idea is for people to come and do their own work, that there is no program, that these are people who have work to do, they need to have a chance to do their work, just leave them alone.
And talk to other people.
And talk to other people. And your line always was, contented cows give good milk. So make a place where we can have contented cows. We didn't have a program.
We had virtually no organized working groups at the beginning. That came much later.
Well, it was interesting. Of course, first of all, we started small, so we didn't have any problems. And then eventually we had to start to institute things like invitation committees, sorting processes about who can come, when. And because we started small, we got to face these problems sort of one at a time.
That happened about 1970, didn't it?
That the deluge.
The committee work began.
Yeah.
Well, we had already, look, the first year of operation was 62. And already by late '61, we had something called, I think we called it an executive committee. Basically, there were two classes of people. There were the people who really did the actual work, who I'd say were the three of us, and Michel Beranger did quite a bit of work, and Lincoln Wolfenstein did some work.
And Henry.
Yeah, well, we formed something, I forget whether we called it an advisory committee or executive committee of big names, some of whom did some work, and others who basically said, you can use my name, but I don't want to do work. And many of these people were from Carnegie Tech, which is where George was. Finally, Julius Ashkin was the head of that committee. Let's see, Henry Primakoff, a colleague of mine, was on the committee. Murph Goldberger from Princeton was on the committee. Wolfenstein was on the committee. Gosh, that's the trouble if I don't have the list in front of me. I always forget someone. Dave Jackson from Illinois, also the author of a famous textbook. Now, how did we decide who was going to come? The first year it was quite a tricky thing because we wanted to get a bunch of names on the list that we could use as bait, to get other people to come. And we had to have, respectable people whose names could also be used in our fundraising activities, in particular vis-a-vis the National Science Foundation. So basically, we had to get some people to pretty much commit themselves to come if there was to be a physics institute, but we couldn't guarantee them that there would be anything to come to. And fortunately, quite a few people were willing to cooperate on that basis. I know, Marshak, for example, got on board, which was a big plus for us. He got on board in the spring. Randy Durand, whom we were happy to have, but was less of a big fish at that time, got on board quite early. But at any rate, that first year, we basically empowered each member of this prestigious committee to invite anyone. At that time, it was all he's, you'll pardon the expression. The language wasn't gender neutral. But anyway, each member of that high-level committee could invite anyone he wanted, although I think nominally he had to touch base with the other people. I think after the first year, I think basically no one was ever invited. At least nominally, they had to go through our committee. But in the second year, when Hans Bethe wrote in and said he wanted to come, of course, we said, hurrah. Incidentally, Bethe knew about Aspen already. He and his wife had come here in the 1940s, and I guess lived in a cabin which was owned by the Maxwells, who were the parents of Joy Caudill. So it's a small world,
And I think one of the reasons he came also was that Fermi was here early, and also Don Hughes. One of the things Pepke liked to encourage in the executives program and in the Aspen Institute format was having scientists at the table. So from the very beginning, there was a certain amount of the University of Chicago tradition, but particularly Enrico Fermi, and I'll have to think about some of the others, but there were several. And I think Hans came, and during that early period, which was even before the Institute was formalized, back in the 40s, between 1946 and 1950. The Institute was founded in 1950.
Yeah, it wasn't in fact Harold Urey one of those early people out here too? With Harold Urey, which
Yeah,
goes
Urey
back
came
to
out. Yeah, Urey.
Michelle's father-in-law.
You know, he was
Right.
Michelle. Yeah, but those people never. Well,
They
I
were
mean,
not involved
Fermi
in
and
physics.
Urey never
Never
participated in
Yeah,
our
no.
institute.
Well-
Bethe supported us from the beginning. I think probably, while we were wrangling with NSF from very early on, I'm sure
He
Bethe.
gave part of his Nobel.
Well, that was later. Bethe gave
Later
us
on, yeah.
Bethe gave us money on a number of occasions, but I think from early on we had his support. He was probably even on our advisory committee. To get this thing off the ground, we really needed the support of prestigious physicists, and many of them were wonderful and helped us. I mean, there was a hierarchical structure to the subject, and we were very fortunate in having the support of the people to whom the NSF listened. I think there were a number of important physicists who, behind the scenes, told NSF that this was a boondoggle and should not be supported, but I'm not going to name their names. During the first year of operation, namely 62, I was what we now call the housing person. That is, everyone finally had to write me who had rounded them up. They might have been initially rounded up by Beranger or Jackson or Wolfenstein, or in some cases, it was second order. Someone would say, I heard from Wolfenstein, I'd be interested in coming. But finally, in the folder, there were a huge number of letters from all sorts of people to me, and finally, they had to deal with me. Now, the on-site housing of the first year was handled by a wonderful young woman whom Bob Craig hired. He knew all the wonderful young women in Aspen. A young woman named Betsy Baldwin, who was the detail person on site. I believe she lined up the housing, and she acted as our secretary the first summer. I think we had one secretary at that point.
Bob, did Betsy Baldwin work over here or that summer, or stay with her desk over at the
Her
Institute?
desk was at the Institute, but I think she
She finally had a desk
finally
in
got a
our
desk.
place.
Yeah, we
At-
moved.
And she was typing out papers for
at
physicists.
Stranahan Hall. Yeah.
And George, what were you doing while Mike was rounding up physicists?
I was rounding up money and dealing with the building and trying not to offend the Institute trustees. Who perpetrated the Wayne Gruner hoax?
Okay,
We want
let's
to discuss the hoax. That was
Well, the hoax is
No.
very funny.
Okay, well,
we have to
let's-
talk about the hoax.
well,
but
there
we
are
ought
a number of
we ought to
hoaxes.
establish the setting
Right, let's
of
okay,
Wayne
so
Gruner.
Mike
number
is
of
going to let
hoaxes.
you
Wayne
take
Gruner
it. You
was-
just take it. Whoever
Well, there are a
takes
number
it.
of hoaxes.
I was sent by, or deputized by Mike and George to go to NSF to visit Wayne Gruner, and he had in his as his responsibility summer physics activities.
Well, I
In
think
fact, he
had
tried
all-
to discourage me.
They had theoretical physics as a
Yeah, I think he had
Theoretical, yeah.
theoretical physics
Theoretical
as his
physics.
jurisdiction.
1962, right?
Yeah, we started talking to him, I guess, in early
And,
62 or late 61.
He said, well, there's already a summer institute at the University of Wisconsin, and it's questionable how effective it is. And, I was sort of grasping for straws and had no answers to that, but I said, well, this is a much different environment, and we have a lot of people who make real contributions to science coming to the Aspen Institute and so on. I lied about a lot of things.
He was very good at that.
Yeah.
Now,
And he said, well, we'll consider it, but the only thing we'll consider for you would be $25,000 for a library. That was the first grant, right? Remember?
well, in fact, I believe we got nothing from him the
No, we
first
didn't get
summer.
anything yet, that's
And
right.
the second summer, I think he finally kicked in with $5,000 for a
Yeah.
library.
for a library, but
But the plot was much thicker than that.
Yeah.
We put in infinite amount of time, in particular Bob, dealing with Gruner and the file on that subject goes on and on. It's hard to put yourself in the shoes of, you know, sort of a somewhat minor NSF bureaucrat. You know, he could get in trouble, I suppose, for funding a, you know, picnic for a bunch of physicists out in a rich person's spa. On the other hand, he could also demonstrate great vision. I mean, look at this incredible operation we have. I'd be much interested to find out what NSF has put out in more recent years about this operation. I'm sure it's a jewel in their crown in terms of the amount of, you know, physics and interchange which they get per dollar. But
if you compare it, for example, to Santa Fe Institute.
Yeah. But I think their original attitude toward us was that they were going to basically put us out into a lake in a sieve and see if we could paddle across the lake without drowning. And I think if we could do that 5 times, then maybe around the 5th year they would fund us. One thing I think is very important, and actually I'll give myself a little pat on the back about this. We continually argued with Gruner about getting some support for, you know, our secretarial activities and the famous rather modest housing subsidy, which we thought was necessary to get physicists to come here. And in a way, by discussing that, we kept the discussion away from what could have been a much more controversial area, namely the portability of summer salaries. Because I think up to the point when we started this operation here, it was just taken as a given that a physicist who draws a summer salary would stay home at his or her own institution. And we basically never talked about summer salaries. So I think there's some political wisdom in arguing about what was really a rather small item, although it was important from the point of view of this physics institute. But the amount involved in summer salaries was much, much more money. And if the NSF and the ONR, these people met together, hadn't agreed to let people bring their salaries, then this whole thing would have been dead in the water. Now, we would have been completely out of the woods and had no problems if these people could also, if the physicists could have brought with them the overhead that the universities get on their summer salaries. You see, if the overhead could have followed the physicists, then we would have been swimming in money, at least by our standards. But I think it was also clear to us who knew something about the way universities work that they might sit still, and finally did sit still, to let the salaries go with the physicists. But if 1 nickel of overhead followed them, then the universities would have vetoed this thing. In fact, Bob Craig, as you can find out by the file, must have run all over Washington 10 times trying to help out Kurt Gottfried from Harvard, whose salary was paid by the Air Force. And the Air Force initially wouldn't go along with letting Gottfried's salary follow him. I think Craig, I don't know, he may have gone to Bobby Kennedy, or no, actually Bob really seriously did
Bob.
This Bob.
Another Bob.
Had close. Well, this Bob was friends with Bob Kennedy.
Bob McNamara was the guy.
But I thought the guy that Bob really dealt with was Eugene Fubini, who was something like Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research. And I think a number of times Fubini came down from high above on to various lesser people, and, for example, and told the Air Force finally to pay Gottfried's salary, and finally told the ONR to give us some money. I think we were somewhat embarrassed to have this heavy-handed character, Craig, bullying these guys in Washington on our behalf, but we probably wouldn't have made it without that.
Well, I did go to Fubini, and in turn, Fubini also introduced me to, arranged for me to get to know Manny Piori, who was head of research at IBM, and that led to IBM participating in funding, which was really our first corporate funding that we got for the physics. I think the year was 1963. Did that square with your records, Michael?
Well, unfortunately, all my records are under my feet here. I think the deal is that
Might have been
during
earlier.
Yeah, I think the deal is that during the first summer, I think IBM actually gave us maybe a $15,000 operating grant, because I don't think we had operating grants from NSF or ONR during the first summer. George certainly was paying for most of the building. I
And
believe.
the salaries that came took care of, so we had enough spin-off from the people who attended to pay for secretarial.
Well, the people who attended paid virtually no registration fee, maybe $50. And the total number of attendees in the first summer,
Was it 40?
I'd have to check, it was maybe 30.
I thought it was 40, but
What I do remember is that as we approached the second summer, and a lot of people wanted to come, so it looked as though we might have basically 20 people in residence, maybe turning over twice. Craig began to worry whether that would be too many physicists to upset the nice cultural balance in Aspen. I don't think I have a letter to that
I didn't worry very much about that.
Let's see,
The history of the funding, if we were to really discuss that, I think we'd really have to sit down, at least for the first 3 years, we'd have to read the records rather carefully. But the first summer's funding wasn't really cleaned up, I think, till after the end of the summer, when I know we had some money from IBM, which may have been separate from the money they gave us for the building. I think George, through Needmore, kicked in after the end of the summer with some money. And I believe, I don't know Ted Weiner, but I believe he came in with some money.
Our kind of agreement with the Institute was that if there was any unpaid bills by the end of the summer, that somehow or other they would be made whole. And it wasn't very much.
Yeah,
and we actually
we advanced some from the Institute also, sort of sub rosa, under the table, mostly to help make sure that the secretaries were covered. But I think what happened was that from the registration, you ought to check on that to see whether we had a registration fee. But there was enough that we came out having to ask for very little from Needmore.
about how much time did you put into it?
Oh, it was kind of whatever it took, and I can't really. I was doing several things at that time, running the executives program, and the lecture series, and negotiating with the music associates on the property and on the tent, and so the physics center was just one piece of. But I spent as much time as I could because I was fascinated by the people.
Did you use any of the physicists for your summer program? For your program?
Ultimately,
that first summer?
Not the first summer, no.
But go ahead. Then, did you have some of them giving lectures? Or?
Later on, we did.
I think even in the first summer, occasionally some of the physicists participated in at least one afternoon meeting with the executives, though they didn't sit through the whole executive session. I think it generally didn't work very well.
No, it didn't. It was a tough thing to factor in because neither side really had an understanding where the others were coming from. Certainly the physicists didn't understand why the business executives were here to get a kind of course of sprouts in American history and founding papers.
What makes you think we didn't understand that?
Well,
I think we knew why they were here. Maybe they didn't know why we were here.
no, that's fine.
George, did you put a lot? What did you do? Like
Basically,
first?
that was what I did with my life during those years, which and largely, that's really true.
Well, you got yourself an academic job. Or was there a delay in that?
No, I got
You
myself
got
an
your job
academic
at
job.
Michigan State, wasn't
Well,
it?
I went to Purdue for a postdoc,
I see.
but it was I think pretty soon I was more valued in the university life for the connection with the Center for Physics than I was for my publications, which were minimal, because I was putting my time into this business. So I actually leveraged my academic career, I think, more on the relationship to this joint than my relationship to physics.
Where did people live the first year who found the housing for them?
I believe Betsy
Betsy
Baldwin.
Baldwin,
Betsy.
and Betsy worked for the Institute, so she had a pretty good handle.
We had a
on what
lot
was
of
available.
houses. We had a lot of actual houses at that time.
Yeah. We had more houses than condominiums or apartments, as a matter of fact.
I did mention in my cover sheet that goes with my section of the archives. First of all, the first three secretaries. Incidentally, Sally Mensimer appears only at the end of my file, so I'm sure you could have a 3-hour session about Sally. But my file ends in around June '64, and Sally appeared in May. Betsy Baldwin, who was very good to us, was actually, Bob and I called her the Magna Mater. She looked after everyone and everything in the first year. I believe Betsy took a job with the Bank of Aspen, because we expected almost up till the last minute to have Betsy as our Magna Mater the second year, and but actually Marcy Bayless, as her name was then, became our secretary. She's now married to Herbie Balderson. I should say, though, because the name has to be mentioned, during the first half of 1963, Carol Ann Jacobson, who worked for Bob at the Institute, handled our housing with remarkable competence. And she also handled the housing again the following year. So Marcy was simply our secretary. And by the time Sally came on board in '64, I think Carol Ann had done our housing. Carol Ann, of course, she was just a kid. She must have been 19 or 20.
She was probably 21, 22.
Well, she was maybe 21, but...
This was a training program for her to develop her real estate business.
Yeah, but Carol Ann was incredibly competent.
She's very competent.
And became a wonderful friend to many of us individually, and of course has always been very helpful to the Physics Institute. Marcy, I'd say, was sort of a real, wonderful young Aspen ski bum. I think she was really scared when she walked onto the premises. She was a little kid, and here all these professors, and I think at first, she dressed, the way you should dress when you're working for a bunch of professors. By the end of the first month, I think she had caught on to the informality of the place. I distinctly have a memory of her one morning jumping up onto the desk in the lobby of what is now called Stranahan Hall and clapping our hands and saying, "Boys, I have an announcement to make." I forget what the announcement was, but by that time, instead of being Professor this and Doctor that, we were all boys. I do recall a completely remarkable confrontation between her and this fabulously eccentric and brilliant mathematician, Paul Erdős, who died only recently. The New York Times actually ran a front-page story on Erdős. He was a cultural monument. Erdős never had a place to live. He visited around, staying with various people. I got to know him because he used to frequently stay with my friend Stan Ulam and his wife. Anyway, I think what I remember was the Ulams were out here visiting me. They never participated in the Institute. And maybe Erdős was actually staying at Hans Bethe's house. But somehow, I think maybe Stan and I needed to be driven over to Bethe's house. And Marcy, at the end of the day, drove us over there. And there was this fantastic confrontation between this sweet young Aspen ski creature and Paul Erdős, who even by the standards of mathematicians was unbelievably far out. And Erdős had a wonderful sense of humor. But one thing about him, one famous characteristic of Erdős was that he had his own private vocabulary. And anyone who wanted to talk to Erdős had to talk to him in his private vocabulary. And all mathematicians knew this. And you had to learn his vocabulary. He also talked with a lisp. So I remember Marcy had a cute little dog called Muggles that was with us. And Erdős turns to her and says, "Is that your monster hound?" And she said, "That's not my monster hound, that's my little dog." He said, "Oh, all dogs are monster hounds." Then he asked her, "Are you a boss?" That means, "Are you married?" And she said, "I don't think I'm a boss." And he said, "Well, do you have a slave?" That means, "Do you have a husband?" and it went on like this. It was absolutely fabulous to watch. But anecdotes. Maybe Bob Craig wants to tell about the famous visit from Gruner.
Let me do a Marcy story
okay,
too, because I remember
Marcy's
that was this, Hans Bethe showed up that summer, and I remember Marcy came into me and said, Hans has asked me to come down and take dictation. I don't know how to do that. And I said, "Fake it." And she did.
That's great. I can't tell the Wayne Gruner story correctly. I think you're going to have to.
Well, okay, maybe I'll tell it.
Now you go ahead.
You should tell it.
Yeah, well, okay, George can chip in. I think Gruner never visited our operation.
No, I have never seen that guy's face.
At that time, this was probably 63. Could have even been as late as 64.
So at least 2 years after.
Yeah,
we first met him.
we were still courting Gruner. By the way, we should mention
Sloan.
Oh yeah, well Sloan came in later.
Yeah.
Sloan, this is after '64, but when we were finally, there was a period, I don't know whether it was around '66, when we were really down on our luck. We had run through our first wave of funding, and there was a point when we were really threatened with bankruptcy unless George was going to pay for everything. And I mean, there was a limit to how much we could ask from George. And at that point, Marshak, who was on the Science Advisory Board of Sloan, Marshak personally went in there and got them to give us a an operating grant for 2 or 3 years. But prior to that, I'm talking about maybe 63 or 64. We were very eager to have Gruner at least come out here and see what the place looks like. Because we thought it would bear inspection very well. It was also the case that I think from time to time, although it looks much better now in this respect, if you walked around the offices on a given afternoon, the attendance rate, the number of people at their desks, was not always as high as it should be. Now, I think if you averaged over the whole week, you know, people were working in the night and doing all sorts of things. Yeah. But what happened was, I guess Dan Fievel was the engineer of this. Fievel called up Stranahan, who was sitting at his desk in the physics building, and he says, "This is Wayne Gruner. I'm at the Denver airport. I'll be arriving at 3 o'clock. I want you to pick me up and take me over to the Physics Institute. I want to see what goes on there." And he said, "While I'm there, I want to talk to Cohen. I want to talk to Bethe." He gave a list of people that he wanted to see. I think the first thing that George told Gruner, was it you who actually talked to Fievel?
Yeah, I actually talked to Fievel
Yeah.
and did not recognize his voice.
Yeah, so he said he was Gruner. And I think even Bethe was off hiking or something.
There was not a soul in the
Yeah,
building. I mean, everybody that Wayne Gruner asked for
everyone that Gruner wanted to see
was out
not
hiking.
there. In particular, I know where Cohen was. Cohen had signed on.
Grotto Walls.
Cohen had signed on with George Bell and David Michael to make the first ascent of the north face of Capitol. And Bell had assigned David Michael to check me out and find out if I knew how to climb. So I was up on a wall just off the Independence Pass Road with David Michael. And George came charging up there with his Jeep and said, "You got to come down off the wall." So I came down off the wall. And the deal was that somehow Gruner told, namely Fievel, told Stranahan that he, Gruner, would be at Sidney Bloodman's place. Bloodman was in on the gag.
Yeah.
So I remember when Stranahan took me down to Bloodman's, Fievel and Bloodman were crouched to receive a physical blow from me. And I think quite a bit of booze had to be served in order to calm us down. I guess if we're talking about hoaxes, I was rather proud of one that I pulled on Craig. Craig was running for his pal Bob Kennedy. Craig was running a strange conference entitled The Hostile Foreign Student. And the idea was to assemble a bunch of foreign student leaders from various American campuses. But the thing that would get them invited to the campus was that they had to be notable for how much they hated the United States. So the idea was for them to air out their grievances to Bobby Kennedy, and he was going to, deal with them one-on-one. And it was a closed conference. I tried to eavesdrop at the door one day, and there was a woman with her ear to the door at the same time who turned out to be Ethel Kennedy. But my contribution to this occasion, right at the beginning, was to call up Craig's office and put on my best Indian from India accent and say, "I am Deshpande, the head of the Indian Student Association, and where is the limousine which was supposed to meet me at the airport?" And I yo-yoed Craig's secretary at that for quite a while before letting her off the hook. Yes, it doesn't work.
Those were the innocent days of Aspen.
Yes.
When do you think the Physics Center was eventually accepted by Aspen?
You know, it's a transition because
Yeah.
I think at first we were ignored, and then it got to be like sort of folklore. If you saw this bespectacled, maybe furry person bicycling down Main Street and
Not knowing where he's going.
not even
right?
being in the right-hand lane, it was sort of a joke. That must be a physicist. And I think we were kind of like cute puppy dogs as the first level of acceptance. Aren't they cute? They can't even ride their bikes.
I don't think there was ever any kind of hostility or lack of caring for the physicists in Aspen. The only hostility that was that which I mentioned earlier within the board of the Aspen Institute, because the presence of these very illustrious individuals was threatening. But I think that the town actually was bemused and charmed by the physicists, always has been. I think it's probably the best kept secret. As I've said before, and I'll say it now, I still think the greatest achievement in post-World War II Aspen, that is in modern Aspen, including the music festival and the music school, including the Aspen Institute, and including other activities that have gone on, the design conference, for example. This is far and away the most creative and, I think, qualitatively the best thing that's ever happened.
I think the thing has succeeded way beyond our wildest expectations. And of course, this has to do with all the wonderful people that took over the operation later on. I mean, I just wouldn't dare try to make a recital because it would be so incomplete. But I mean, well, Randy Durand is sitting in the auditorium. There were so many people who were so wonderfully helpful. Well, more than helpful. They took over the management of the place. They handled things in a absolutely professional way. Of course, Dave Schramm, whom we miss very much, turned out to be just an incredible entrepreneur. The wonderful campus that we have now was, well, I guess the conception of a number of people, but certainly Dave, perhaps more than anyone else, brought it into actual realization. I was long since out of the operation in all respects by the time Dave got really involved. But when I heard of his plans to put up this wonderful new building and tear down the old wooden temporary building that we had had for 30 years, I thought this guy is going to bankrupt the operation. It will be like a gutter Demerung. The thing will go out with a big bang. I mean, not just in terms of the physical magnificence of the campus, but the role that the Physics Center plays in the physics world. It's just been, I'm sure, beyond any of our wildest dreams. These kids that we see walking around the campus, I'm sure most of them don't know where this thing came from, but that's the way it is, you know. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure all of us are old enough, and people like Randy who followed us don't worry about that much because we don't expect to be thanked in that way. You know, the institution itself gives us great gratification.
I consider it personally as one of the best things I've ever been associated with and had an opportunity to be a part of. In my next life, I would like to be a physicist.
I recommend against it.
I know you do, but then I have some other evidence.
George?
Well, I have to agree that we had no vision beyond basically the next month or two, I think, in those days.
Yeah.
So we were not capable of envisioning what it's become. One of the things that I am actually proudest about is the habits of the heart of the place, the culture that I think, in fact, we are a bit responsible for, which was committed leadership, that a person would basically lay aside their physics for a while to come and work for this place, to make it what it is. And it's just been a succession of leaders that have made that kind of a commitment because they cared. They cared. And that is actually why it is what it is.
Why did each of you get out of the operation of it?
10th anniversary of the institution came, and I think I had the wisdom at that time to understand that about 10 years was time to get out, that you're stale. Leadership really sour. Leadership goes south. And my theory on that is that in short order, a whole bunch of the people that you're leading actually know all of your weaknesses, and they know the difference between your bark and your bite, and they know how to get around you and maneuver the whole organization. It really is time to leave and turn over to somebody new who can scare these people back into line. So I think I had some sense that the organization needed to rotate and always bring in new young people and bring in a new energy, and it's worked.
Well, I left the Institute in 1964, and I knew I remained connected to the Physics Center, but I think I'd done what I could do at that point, and I moved on to doing other things. Part of my experience here got kind of reborn in an effort that we did recently, actually starting in 1990, called the Scientist to Scientist Colloquium, which I started up at Keystone at the center, and in which we tried to involve people from the Physics Center. Dave Schramm, for example, was one of the chairs, and it involved a lot of people in a very multidisciplinary sense of science, not just biology or physics, but many other fields became involved there. And that went on for about 5 years, and then I retired from the center, and that was the end of that. But it was quite successful, and it is an idea, by the way. I would hope that some institution like the Physics Center at some point might feel inclined to pick up and run with. Several universities on a regional basis have tried to carry the idea forward. That is the Scientist to Scientist Colloquium, of talking across fields. Yale, Cal Berkeley, University of Washington, and I think there's MIT, I think, has tried it in a small way. So,
Mike, did you phase out at some point?
Actually, I think I phased out, well, much, much earlier than George. In fact, I don't think George has ever phased out. I mean, even when he ceased to be involved in the active management of the Physics Center, he's always been involved in negotiations with the town about, the real estate and whatever. I really was out of this thing pretty early. It's easy to elevate laziness to a virtue. Well, first of all, it was absolutely essential that the management of this thing should spread out to the rest of the physics community. And fortunately, there were a lot of people like Randy and Peter Kaus, and then many other generations, David Pines, who wanted to step in. So it was very already fairly early on, a recurring criticism was that this whole operation belonged to a little in-group, and we were inviting our buddies to come back again and again. So it was very good for us to get out. Speaking for myself, my physics career wasn't doing that great at that point, and I certainly needed to spend more time on it. Let me say, though, I never thought of myself as having sacrificed any part of my physics career to starting this institute, though I am impressed when I look at the files at how much time I put in. I think people do what they want to do. And if we were doing this, it was something that gave us great gratification. But it happened, though, that the time was definitely ripe for both George and me to hand over the management of the Physics Institute to the physics community. And I mean, you go to I've occasionally attended one or part of a meeting of the board, and I'm just so impressed at the professionalism with which everything is handled now. I mean, we ran this thing, I don't know, we were running it out of our, if not out of a hip pocket, out of a briefcase. But it was certainly time to get out. I have 3 wonderful children. If you came to me or with some Faustian deal, either give up your children, they never existed, or give up your, what you did here and your name on the plaque. Of course, I give up my name on the plaque. Certainly, this exceeds anything I ever did in physics. Actually, I think I did some moderately good stuff, but I never did anything else administratively. I briefly got dragooned into a little administrative work in our department, which was, well, I didn't do it badly. But of course, no, I regard this as a wonderful achievement that I'm pleased to be remembered for. There's one other thing in my life which I'm embarrassed to say this, sitting next to past president of the American Alpine Club, but as a result of being out here, I became a very good rock climber and have my name on a bunch of routes. I'm very proud of that because it gives me recognition in, among a group of people outside of the eggheads. But to me, this is a wonderful thing. I absolutely insist that all of my children, sooner or later, have to come and see this place and see my name on the plaque.
Well, as I said before, it's a thing that, in a way, I'm as proud of as anything that I've done, whether it was as director of the Aspen Institute, which was a very exciting and unlikely kind of activity for a guy who trained in philosophy and had an interest in science and was kind of considered himself to be an intellectual madam. I was very fortunate to be able to start a new center in Keystone. That's been fun. But the physics center really for me was, I look back on it with a great deal of whimsy and amusement and pleasure because it was fun. And I got to meet and get to know people like George and Michael, whom I value as among my dearest friends, and also yourself and Randy and many others, Murray, and a whole range of people. I mean, I've never met a more special group of people than I've met in the Physics Center. And I'm sorry, I did come to the board meetings until fairly recently, but I got kind of preoccupied with my retirement. I still would like to attend an occasional board meeting over here. I didn't get the announcement this year because my mail was being sent back. In any event, this has been a singular part of my life.
But what about climbing mountains?
Well, I separate those things, and I separate my 3 children, whom I adore, and I'm fortunate to have a very good relationship with. But and they all are very aware of the existence of the Physics Center, and I think they value it. But as far as climbing and comparing it to climbing, that's kind of apples and oranges.
You don't think they have anything to do with each other?
Well, no, I mean, that's another category in which I feel I've been very fortunate.
Remember what Herzog said? There are other Annapurnas in the lives of men.
That's true.
This was another Annapurna.
George?
There are no other Cohens in my life.
Yeah, of course, it was a big event for me, and I was, and I look back on it quite a bit, trying to see what could I learn from having had this experience. And as I try to analyze, I mean, because here it is. I mean, this is a phenomenon, and we actually were the seed from which this thing grew and has flourished to this thing. And so what could I learn from this? One, I think we were incredibly, remarkably lucky that we hit the right place, Aspen, Colorado, Aspen Institute, at the right time, post-Sputnik, funding coming into theoretical physics. For some reason, absolutely unpredictable reason that Craig was here, I was here, Michelle Banerjee knew Cohen, that absolutely unpredictable that the 3 of us would come together and do this. So the roll of luck is, I think, what I would.
Do you think it could happen today?
No,
I think not.
I think not.
Be tough. Yeah.
The Institute went through, I guess, R.O. Anderson's sort of rejection stage about, he started to hate Aspen, and part of the way to hate Aspen was to destroy the Institute. I think it kind of came down to some of that, and all of a sudden this developer, Hadid, owns the Physics Center, because and the community decided to actually mount an attack and say these things are more valuable to the community than Hadid will know, and we need to wrench control of that land away from developers and sort of sanctify it as what it is. And at least for 3 years, it was weekly, nonstop negotiations with the music, the institute, the city, and I represented the Physics Center for all of those incredibly long meetings. And of course, Hadid. I mean, and the end result was the division of the property into a Hadid part, an institute part, a music part, and the physics part. And it was a most incredibly interesting bunch of characters I've ever seen. Snakes that I sat in those rooms with.
What did you have to do?
I lied, but you see, I lied to help start this place too, so as we all did. A good experienced liar. I remember at one point they came in and it was the Hadid group said, things would be a lot better if we just could move the Physics Center over to the hillside behind Pepke Auditorium, and then we would have that space there to put our houses on. And I said, well, of course, that's a wonderful idea, and we accept that immediately. And they were dumbfounded that they could get this immediate agreement to move the whole Physics Center over there. And I said, and of course, we'll do it at your expense. And that was the end of that.
Actually, Michelle wrote me the following letter in the fall of 1962. I believe after bringing us together in '61, during the first year, he was a member of this executive committee as we called it. And I certainly don't want to minimize anything that he did. The first year, probably, we did the brunt of the work. In '62, Michelle agreed to handle the housing, which I had done in the first year. And I had sent him the letter inviting him to handle the housing. And he was a little slow to answer. And then he writes, as a matter of fact, I shall be very glad to contribute some labor to an enterprise which I consider eminently worthwhile and whose birth I help to bring about in a small but essential way. I have thought hard to try to determine my degree of kinship with the Aspen Physics Institute. Then he says, well, I'll just tell you what he says. He says, clearly, you are the father, you being me. And George is obviously the fairy godmother. Bob Craig could be described as the mother. Well, he actually says Bob Craig or the Humanistic Institute at large could be described as the mother since the embryo was nourished in their womb. So I must have been the ray of moonlight which started it all. That's what he says. When I wrote him back thanking him for agreeing to take on the housing, I told him that your quandary concerning your role in the parentage of the Institute merely illustrates again the inadequacy of the English language. You were obviously the shotgun. The shotgun is the Yiddish word for a matchmaker. I said any merchant on Squirrel Hill, which is where he lived in Pittsburgh, will tell you what that means. So, I mean, whose name you put on the plaque, or whether you can put up another plaque, and I'm sure none of us worries about that.
I'd just add one thing. All of the other organizations involved, the Institute and the Music and the Design Conference, all came with their lawyers. And it was lawyer, lawyer, lawyer. We never, ever took a lawyer to one of the meetings. And I really credit the fact that there was one organization without a lawyer with providing enough oil. Because otherwise, it's lawyer talking lawyer. And we provided the actual oil, I think, that finally said enough.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point. I remember my first climb with Randy, by the way.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Up Lincoln Gulch, we did Mount Anderson or something.
Yeah.
Well, excuse me, but having said that, I've got to say something about maybe my first climb with Randy. We went out to Capitol Peak, and somehow no one knew that the easy way to go into Capitol Peak was from going in from the north and following Capitol Creek. So we went in from, I guess, Snowmass Ranch, and
Wrong.
and what I remember was we crossed the same stream at least a dozen times. And Randy had great experience as a camp counselor, and he was accustomed to having all the campers do what he told us. So Randy would simply point, meaning we had to cross the stream. Then he would point, meaning we had to cross the stream again. Then he would point again. It took me a little while to regain good feelings toward Randy.
There's also a clear connection between biologists and liking the mountains and skiing. That's why we've got this thing going in Keystone called the Keystone Symposium on Molecular and Cellular Biology. And we get, 9,000 scientists a winter for those meetings.
Yeah, I remember at Heinz Pagel's memorial, and I think we were struggling with that because the mountains had actually caused his death. And I think it was Jeremy Bernstein was trying to address why is it? Because it is true.
Yep.
And his remarks were that because on top of the mountain you can see far away. And that was where he came from.
Oh, you know Murray Gell-Mann's, oh no, it was Sidney Coleman, who had a variant on, Newton's famous statement. Isaac Newton said, if I have seen further than others, it is because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Murray Gell-Mann and Sidney Coleman some years ago wrote a very smart paper on some topic that a lot of other people had been working on. And Sidney Coleman said, if we see further than others, it is because we look over the heads of dwarfs. But about physicists and climbing, of course, there are a lot of people who climb. The connection, I point out the following. Probably all or many of you have read Krakauer's book about the terrible disaster on Everest involving, all these parties of guided climbers.
Thin air.
Yeah. I don't think, there were certainly no physicists involved in that situation. That's not the kind of shtick for physicists. I think physicists are very much into doing things for themselves. Also, speaking for myself at least, I have always found physics to involve, well, I haven't been so successful at it, but I find you struggle and struggle and struggle with something, and if you're lucky, if anything comes out the other end. Climbing gives an almost instant gratification. You apply yourself to something and you get a result. Now, certainly many other people besides physicists climb, but I think physicists have not bought into this rather unwholesome commercialized climbing scene. You would never find the likes of Bob Craig in a scene like that. Yeah.
Funny things happen, and reflecting on how the Aspen Center for Physics happened has actually helped me to do things like the Aspen Community School, which started actually functioning in the Center for Physics, which was an act of actually fuck you to the Aspen Institute, that because we were struggling over who had control of that building. The Institute would say, well, it's ours and we'll do what we want with it and we'll let you come in if we feel like it. They actually told me that they would give me 90-day vacant warning of when to get out. And so we were trampling a little turf about, well, it's my building, it's my building. So here comes these hippie kids that would want to start a new alternative school in those wonderful days of the late 60s and early 70s. And so I said, come right here, baby. Be right under their nose. And you little puking kids, I want the Institute to see you running around. So that was fun. The Woody Creek Tavern was another institution that I founded, which was based on a little bit the sense of building community, because I always thought that the Center for Physics was a place where we didn't talk about the scientific community so much as we talked about a community of scientists.
Do we get a discount by going in there?
Of course. You want a card? I mean, yeah. So yeah, I've actually gone on to sort of become a founder of institutions, and each time I learn a little more about how important it is to rely on the community that you're serving to develop the institution.
What are you doing now?
Oh God, I've just been replaced as the executive director of an organization called Compass, which I've been founding for the last 10 years, which includes the community school, graduate school of education, a knockoff of the Highlander Center in Tennessee about social justice issues. And, I'm very, very busy.
That's great.
Bob, you went on and founded the Keystone Center.
Yeah.
Did you talk about that just for a bit? What did you do after you left Aspen?
Well, after I left Aspen, I went into business, into the industrial design business, which I didn't like very much, but I had a certain amount of success in, but I didn't, it's been kind of borne out by history, but the designers were mostly embroidering and embellishing products and life processes and so on. They weren't really solving as many problems as I thought they could. And to his credit, I would say Herbert Bayer had represented more of a problem solver, notwithstanding any problems we might have had with Herbert regarding our own buildings. But after founding the center, and it's now a pretty big organization, has offices in Washington and Keystone and operates all over the country. But I'm now working on a project called the Project Against Micronutrient Malnutrition, which really goes to getting micronutrients as additives to food or as fortificants to food all over the world, and not just in the third world, but also in Europe, where certain countries actually resist iodizing salt, for example, and so on. This has been a kind of fun thing for me. I chair the board of this organization, and we're trying to raise money. I'm trying to raise a couple of $1 million for Pam, and it's been fun.
Were there picnics and group hikes the first year?
Not the first year.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I guess
Cocktail parties were...
Cocktail parties.
Betsy Bank,
Yeah,
I think, was the one who said, you guys are not going to not have a cocktail party.
right.
I think
Or a cocktail type party, I think we called it.
I think already in the first year, some of us climbed almost all of the Elk Range.
Yeah.
And we used to have a picnic every week. We didn't have the picnics down on our own campus. We used to go out to various, Ashcroft.
My house, too.
We went to Craig Ranch, all sorts of places. Finally, there were too many of us, and we had to confine the picnics to our own campus. Yeah.
Did you go up jeep roads for your picnics?
I don't.
No, people had regular cars.
Yeah.
We went to Lincoln Creek, up Snowmass. We had a lot of places.
I remember one time at one of the picnics up in Ashcroft, Murray Gelman was being trailed by a crew from the French national TV, and Murray was was shown holding a baby, looking very benevolent, and it was during the Vietnam War. I said, "Do you realize, Murray, that this is going to be the the first picture they show, and the headline under it is going to be Criminal de la Guerre." And Murray corrected me and said, Criminel de la Guerre.
An easy piece of growth was that one of the attractions of the place is that while a physicist wants to do physics, the family wants to have a vacation. So it got to be kind of the convention that they would drive out from wherever they came, and the wife needed the car, the wife and kids needed a car because they were on vacation. So the commuting problem just became a matter of having bicycles. So we began buying used bicycles from the bike shops.
Very good.
And cribs. We were the biggest crib rental.
Yeah. God.
I think that's one of the major sources of income in those days was bike rentals and crib rentals. That was an extra fee. For some time we thought we would endear ourselves to the larger community, and they would then return that endearment with checks. So we began a little invitation list to the cocktail party, and I don't know how it grew, but people would come, a few people. We had a regular crew that would come.
Billy Ruby and Marion Ruby we invited.
Yeah, Caudills were the most regular.
Caudills were very frequent.
And Joan Pomeroy.
Yeah.
I remember one time Mrs. Pepke came over, and either I decided for myself or someone told me to be sure, that she doesn't find herself alone. So I hung around with Mrs. Pepke, trying to be very charming, and be sure, that she was never alone. And she was a wonderful lady. And she finally turned to me and said, you don't have to look after me. Our annual reports to our funders always contained, and I'm sure still do, long lists of papers which acknowledge indebtedness to collaboration, to discussions at the Aspen Center for Physics. I guess what's hard to sort out is what really wouldn't have happened without people being here, and what really owes its existence to the fact that the people were here. And I'm sure that's very hard to sort out. I know in my own history, there was one brief conversation that I had with a guy named Walt Massey, who subsequently became head of NSF. Who had worked with Gene Feenberg in the same area that I was working on. And that brief discussion with him really enabled me to make a kind of technical breakthrough on that problem. But I'm sure there are hundreds of such stories. I don't know whether string theory really originated with Schwartz's presence here. But that's very hard to sort out.
Yeah, but it's a good myth.
Well, it may be more than a myth, especially now that they do have this formal structure where they have working groups. Mm-hmm. And I know that a lot does happen at these working groups, though that's not what we had in mind.
I will point out a whole bunch of mistaken positions that I've taken in the past, which is you're too big, you shouldn't grow anymore, it's too many offices, you've passed critical mass, you're now fragmenting into separate groups, you should not have theme workshops, computers don't belong here, we're about face-to-face interaction. So I've held basically every wrong position there is on these things. And, essentially, thank God I've been overridden, I think.
Yeah.
One lesson, which maybe I was one of the last people to learn as I got older, is to keep your mouth shut if you really don't have that much to say. And I certainly have not been a close observer of this operation for a long time. So I would yield completely to the judgment of the younger people who run it. I'm very dubious. I mean, if I were to send in an application, to participate in this place under an anonymous name, I doubt that my achievements would even qualify me for participation at this point. At any rate, we've handed this operation over to younger and maybe wiser people, and they will do with it as they please.
Okay.
I think that's what's
True.
so gratifying about it. Just that.
Mm. Now that idea of handing it over to younger people, and it's never been owned by an elite or a clique. That it's the tradition that it needs to go down to younger people, and you accept the consequences of that, which is they are in charge.
Okay, thanks a lot.
I'd like to also record for the record that I have a cane at the moment because I hit a tree last December, skiing and broken a leg and an arm. But I'll be back.
And he ruined a tree also.
Yeah, I'm in litigation with the U.S. Forest Service.